As I mentioned at the beginning of our time, we've been focusing in on healing stories, the beloved narratives from our Gospels that show the kind of goodness that emerges when Jesus interacts with and heals individuals. But we've been trying to listen to those stories and dig in a little bit deeper, that we could notice that there is something more in the healing act. Now, don't get me wrong, a healed body is no small thing. But in each of these stories, there is even more that is restored, put back together, than just an individual body. That's the something more that we are seeking in these weeks. I should also add, and it especially seems important today, these healing stories are from another time when the original audience, would have had some different ideas about the spiritual world. So it's important that we not discredit the stories before we give them a fair hearing. I'd suggest that we suspend judgment and try to accept the terms of the story on its own merit before we discredit it by imposing modern conceptions of the world on this story. Can we do that? Okay, because that's really important today with what we've just heard. Up to this point, Jesus' ministry has been making waves. He'd healed, he taught as one who had authority as he made his way across the countryside, gathering crowds and disciples. And in the midst of all of that, even Jesus needed a break from that breakneck pace that he was keeping. So he and his disciples loaded up into a few boats to make an excursion across the sea. It was on this journey that a storm threatened the boats and their well-being, and the disciples became frantic. And as we know, they woke Jesus up, and he calmed the storm, and they sailed the rest of the way on smooth waters. That disruption on the sea pales in comparison to the force that they encountered when they reached the other side of that sea. So much for a bit of rest for Jesus. Because immediately, a man who was not well approached and confronted Jesus. Oh yeah, and this whole story happens at night among the tombs when things go bump in the night. So cue the spooky music. Woo! The man who confronted Jesus was a danger. From time to time, he had inflicted harm upon himself. He'd been a menace to society, and all their attempts to subdue and restrain the man had failed. So this man who was afflicted was left on the outskirts to wander the outer places, the tombs and the hills, while he howled and harmed himself and struck fear in those who could hear him from afar. This man needed to be healed. But so did the communities that had tried and failed to incarcerate him. And when that failed, they just simply abandoned him. For nothing they did was going to help him, so the man was left alone in his suffering. But the disease of those 10 cities, the Decapolis, goes even deeper. For as the story unfolds, it becomes apparent that they're more interested in the well-being of their pigs, a source of commerce, than their neighbor who's suffering. And if that wasn't enough to tip us off that things weren't well among these people, the afflicting spirits who played such a key role in the narrative, they begged Jesus, just let us stay here. It's good for us here. They liked this region. Indeed, this was an afflicted place. But what we have today is a story of healing. One for that man, yes, but also one for a broken community. But healing came in phases, and it started with the man. As we've said, the man had been afflicted, and not by one controlling spirit, but by many. A legion of spirits controlled and hurt him. And in a battle where spiritual strength would determine who will be the victor in this fight, Jesus cast out the spirits. But as they requested, he sent them into the nearby herd of pigs that in unison, as we heard in the story, rushed over the edge of a cliff. And the people who saw what Jesus had done were delighted. Oh, wait, I read that wrong. They weren't delighted at all. They were frightened at what they had seen. 2,000 pigs going over the cliff was a threat to business. And who isn't uncomfortable at the thought of someone with the kind of power that Jesus exhibited just hanging around you? And just maybe the afflicted man, at least when he was kept on the outskirts of town, kept away from the community, was still preferred over being confronted with the true power that brings about real and lasting freedom. In any case, whatever it was, the people begged Jesus to leave. Indeed, they were not well. Now, I want to put a pin in the story here for just a moment. We'll come back to it. But before we move on, it's helpful to know that legion, the name of that spirit or spirits, is a military term. In every other instance in which it's used, it's the name for a Roman military force consisting of 4,000 to 6,000 well-trained troops. And in that time, the region where Jesus had gone for a little bit of rest and found none of it was under Roman occupation. That afflicted man, before Jesus healed him, carried in his body the heavy weight and the harm of living under an occupation. Franz Fanon, in more modern times, has done some important work to clarify what living under occupation can do to a person. The challenge is heavy, and there's a conflict that one lives with internally as one hates the dehumanizing power that's crushing down upon them. But the threat of speaking up and naming it and doing something about it creates great risk to body and being. So the person under occupation is left to suffer in silence. Or as we've seen with the afflicted man in the story who carried the weight of legion within him, that person is torn apart from the inside. And if we can accept that that's what this gospel story is inviting us to consider, it hardly feels like we have to suspend judgment anymore. This doesn't feel like an ancient story anymore, does it? Isn't it the story that we're living right now? In the last several months, the following U.S. cities have been occupied by federal forces: Chicago, Los Angeles, Portland, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, New Orleans, San Francisco, Oakland, Memphis, and as we've seen play out in the last few weeks, Minneapolis. As we've watched the news unfold, especially with our neighbors just a few hours north of us, it's estimated that there were upwards of 4,000 federal agents and officers in Minneapolis during the height of the surge. Legion. In this new, troubling reality where we find ourselves, I see people carrying the heavy weight of fear and hatred of the way things are. And the weight of that is again matched with a growing sense that speaking up could entail great harm to one's being. I was recently speaking with a friend from Memphis. And as we got to the point of the conversation where I said, "How are you doing? What is the mood in occupied Memphis?" Her whole being deflated. She spoke more slowly. There was sorrow in the words that she had to say, but she also didn't quite know what to say. She was grasping for the words that bring some way of naming the sense of violation of public life. The words didn't come easily for her. I see the concerns on faces of people in this room who have family and friends who live in Minneapolis. People who lived in Minneapolis and have a sense of the places where these stories are unfolding. I was in a meeting the other day where another clergy person, who I generally think is one of the boldest people that I know, who said, "I'm not sure we can continue on in the conversation we're having about standing with immigrants because we were on Zoom." She suggested that our conversation should probably move to Signal or some other more secure kind of channel. I was on another call with a pastor who had been in Minneapolis when clergy were called to the city a couple of weeks ago. And the only thing she could liken being in that city to was time that she had been in the West Bank. That kind of stuff is not only a problem out there, somewhere else, but when we live with that kind of weight inside of us, it can work on us from the inside too. And while some of us are feeling this weight and anxiety for the very first time in our lives, I've heard from enough black and brown people who said this has been our existence the whole length of the life of this country. Who knows? Maybe one of the blessings of this time is that we will come to new places of understanding and some empathy that might compel us to build something better together. May that be so. But I want to be clear. I'm not saying any of this to scare you. There's enough out there to scare you. My intention is the exact opposite of that. Because our story, the one that incites fear as we go to the tombs at night, is ultimately a story of healing. And it's a hopeful word for those who experience the power of occupation. I want all of us to stretch our imaginations as we remember what Jesus said to people who were afflicted. And we remember that Jesus set an afflicted man free. And not only was that good news for him, but the people of the cities around were safer when that man was set free. Life was better for all of them, even though the cities were yet to realize how much better it was. But remember, we left off We left off the story where the people of those cities were begging Jesus to get in his boat and get out of Dodge. The story wasn't over at that point. As he was leaving, the man who had been healed and set free also begged Jesus for something. But his request was not for him to go, it was for the man to go with Jesus. Please let me follow you. And Jesus had the audacity to refuse him. Go back to your own people, Jesus said. My people? You've seen what they did to me, and now you're calling them my people? Go back, Jesus told him, and testify to the freedom that you have experienced. That man was right in his desire to follow Jesus to new places, to be a disciple. But Jesus was more serious about healing broken communities. So that man didn't get to leave on that boat with Jesus. Instead, he was planted like a seed of new life among people who were broken and needed a witness to healing in their midst. And the story goes on. He told his story of freedom, the freedom that he experienced when Legion was cast out of him. And something amazing happened. The people who had been frightened when the man was set free were now amazed. If you notice when you read through the Gospels, especially in Mark's Gospel, amazement is a common response of people when Jesus does an act of power or teaches with authority. The healed man's witness evoked the same response from the people that Jesus had evoked when he was ministering among them. And in this story, the work of Jesus' liberating ministry was carried on in that region even after Jesus left. Many of us are carrying the heavy weight of this moment. But I am praying that, like the man who had been afflicted, we too might experience healing. That we too might be seeds of freedom planted here and now. And we'll know that it's happening among us when communities, the communities we're a part of, start moving from fear to being amazed. May it be so, and may it be soon. Amen.